Welcome to the NBAVE podcast.
Welcome back to NBAVE, the NBA Avenue podcast, and today is a pretty frustrating day for me at NBAVE. Of course, we're talking about basketball. This is not going off topic in any way, but why is it frustrating? The answer is there are a lot of people watching, all the other people who cover the NBA, all the analysts, all of the people who have podcasts, YouTube channels, they're all watching the same game, right? Yesterday we saw Denver Nuggets play the Dallas Mavericks, and we saw one of the buzzer beaters of the year, one of the game winners of the year from Kyrie Irving. It was absolutely spectacular. Kyrie doing a shot with his left hand that you just really don't ever see, and certainly not from a guard. And I want to go more into that later because there were a lot of signs that Kyrie can take this sort of shot. He typically, I don't believe, takes it with the left hand. I believe it's the right hand, which we'll talk about. But now you have, if you listen to the chatter going on today, you hear Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo talking about how Dallas is essentially a dark horse and maybe they are a team that can give Denver a problem, and you're hearing all the similar type of chatter from all the other media outlets and all the other shows. And it's frustrating because there were some of us, myself included, who were on the Dallas Mavericks bandwagon as people come. Not that we want Dallas to win. If you're really doing a good job as being part of media coverage, you don't want any particular team to win. But we were on this in saying that Dallas was the dark horse, but we said this at the trade deadline. If you're a daily listener of this show, you know that we were already on Dallas when they brought in Gafford and PJ Washington. And not just because of Gafford specifically or PJ Washington specifically, but you know, if you listen to this show, that it wasn't just those guys independent of anything else. It's those guys relative to the team that you already had and how it fills out the rest of the roster. And we've spoke at length about Dallas and about how their upside is so much higher than all of these other teams in the Western Conference who are in, who are after Denver. Their upside is so high because they have a player on their team who can rise above and be the best player in any playoff series. And that even includes going against Denver, where Denver has Nikola Jokic. So if you look at Denver's odds against any other team in the playoffs, it's going to be how many other teams have a player who can rival what Jokic can do in any given playoff series? You can maybe say Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but his team is very young. You can't say that Anthony Edwards on Minnesota or Karl Anthony Towns, assuming he was healthy, would rival anything that Jokic would do in a 7-game playoff series. In the Los Angeles Clippers case, you can maybe try to make a case that Kawhi Leonard could, theoretically, play a comparable series to something that Jokic can give you. Nothing on the Pelicans. I don't think you could say that De'Aaron Fox on Sacramento would bring that. Maybe you could try to make a case that Kevin Durant would do something like Nikola Jokic, but probably at this point in his career, he's probably not going to be able to do that. So there's very few teams where you can look and say definitively, this guy can go out there and outplay Nikola Jokic in a playoff series, in the sense that he would be the best player in the series. But with Dallas, anytime you have Luka, and this is literally the way we've phrased it many times in the past, that anytime you have Luka on the court, he can and will frequently be the best player in any given game. And that, combined with the fact that you have another guy on the team who has that clutch ability to hit any shot with any amount of time on the clock, no matter what the score, no matter what the quarter, he can hit anything. That's Kyrie Irving. So you now have two players who you have Luka as the one who could be the best player in any series. And then you have Kyrie who can play in any given game as the second best guy or even sometimes as the first best guy. You have the ability to beat any team, and that means that's including Denver. And that's why we talked about Dallas as a dark horse to actually win the finals. we made a list maybe about 15, 20, 25 episodes ago of the podcast where we covered who are the teams who legitimately have a shot to win the title. And in the Eastern Conference, I believe we really narrowed it down to 3. We said it was the Celtics, the Bucks, and the Miami Heat, and then maybe there were some other fringe ones like the Knicks, but it was really the Celtics, Bucks, and the Heat were the top 3 with the chances to win. And then in the Western Conference, we outlined the Denver Nuggets and the Dallas Mavericks, and I believe the Phoenix Suns. Those were the teams who we outlined with a real shot to win it. And we said at the time that Dallas would have a real shot for all of these reasons. It's because you have the one guy who can rise above and be the best player in every single series. So that's 4 straight. That's all the series in the Western Conference, and then the eventual NBA Finals. He can outplay everyone. And that's what Luka did when they faced off against the Phoenix Suns a couple of years ago, and they ended up beating the Phoenix Suns in Game 7 in Phoenix. What happened is Luka played out of his mind, and he was the best player in the series, and he was the best player in Game 7. And that's how the quote-unquote lesser team, the Dallas Mavericks at the time, were able to rise up and beat the Phoenix Suns on their home court in Game 7. And the Mavericks have the ability to do that right now. And they have the ability to do that because with this team, it's Luka, it's Kyrie, and you have the other pieces as well. If Luka or Kyrie doesn't have an amazing game, if one of them don't have an amazing game, you have the volatility of a Tim Hardaway Jr. who you can throw out there, and he can take 15, 20 shots and then and really swing the game. If he is on, that's another volatile piece who can swing the game. And where you have, let's say you have a guy like Luka, or you have a guy like Nikola Jokic. What's great about them is you are consistently having him go out. These guys will go out and they will bring you amazing games. And when they play really well, they can swing the balance of a game. So when you know that every single time you send out Luka or Jokic out there, you know that you have a very high chance of winning the game because they are bound to play well because they play well almost all the time. Then you take a guy like Kyrie, where he doesn't play up to that level all the time, but there's a very high chance on any given night that he will play that well, which will also swing the game in their favor. And then it's gonna from there, from the top, from a Luka and a Kyrie, it's gonna decrease. Where Tim Hardaway Jr., what are the odds that he's gonna play really well tonight? The odds are a little bit less because he's not a top 5 player in the NBA, and now he's not a top 20 player in the NBA. He's somewhere in the top 100. I don't know exactly where he is, but he's somewhere in there as part of these guys who are more volatile. They're a lot less dependable, but on the right night, Tim Hardaway can shift you from being a loser in a game to being a winner. And that's kind of the way I look at a lot of these things, where you have players who will do it every single night. You have players who will do it a couple of times throughout a series, and then you have players who will have 1 or 2 great playoff games where if you make it all the way to the finals, if you're playing all those series, they will have 1 or 2 or 3 games that they have the capability to rise up and win the game for you. Now, what am I talking about? Let's give some examples. Well, I could bring you a couple of examples just from last playoffs. Last year, we had a game where the Los Angeles Lakers were playing against the Warriors, and the game was really close, and at the end of the game, it became known as the Lonnie Walker game. Now, Lonnie Walker is not a top player in the NBA. He's not even a top 100 player in the NBA. But he's the kind of guy where on the right night, when it comes down to the fourth quarter, he can hit a whole bunch of shots and swing the game. And that's why it's known as the Lonnie Walker game, because that was a game that the Lakers were not going to win. And based on what Lonnie Walker himself did in that one game, they swung the balance from a loss against the Warriors to a win, and that is what enabled the Lakers to win that entire series. So you had LeBron for the Lakers. You had Anthony Davis for the Lakers. But on a night where what the two of them did wasn't necessarily enough to win the ball game, the Lonnie Walker volatility of having a guy out there who on that night, is capable of doing something amazing, that swung the balance. And I'll give you an example from the Eastern Conference, from the team that made it to the NBA Finals, the Miami Heat. You had Caleb Martin. He doesn't do it all the time. If you catch him on most nights, he can even be a hindrance to your team in many nights of basketball. But there were games against the Boston Celtics. There was a game or two where Caleb Martin went off the chain, hit a whole bunch of threes, maybe like 6 3-pointers in a game, and was unconscious. And then you make jokes about Caleb Martin turning into Michael Jordan for one game here and there. Over the course of a playoffs where you play round 1, round 2, the semis, and then the finals, Caleb Martin has the ability to have 2 or 3 really incredible games that can shift the balance from a loss to a win. And when you combine that with the top player on his team, Jimmy Butler, and the amount of consistency he brings in the playoffs with his ability to shift games from losses to wins, and then you also say, well, hey, on other nights, this is the Caleb Martin game. On other nights, going back to the Lakers, this is the Lonnie Walker game. You've now added the necessary volatility in there to where you have enough possible pieces to where if each of these guys has 1 or 2 really awesome games in an entire playoffs, those are a lot of games that are accumulatively adding up to going from losses to wins. So you want to have as many guys as you possibly can who can do that. And another good example from this regular season is you had a game where Max Strus went off the chain for Cleveland. He caught fire in the fourth quarter, and he hit one of the great buzzer beaters of all time, a 3-quarter court buzzer beater to beat the Boston Celtics. I believe it was Boston. I mean, my memory is hit or miss sometimes, but that was an incredible victory where you don't win that game if not for Max Strus. That's the Max Strus game. And Max Strus last season was on Miami, and that was what was great about that Miami team is that they had the consistency of Jimmy Butler, and you had the overall consistency of Bam Adebayo on the defensive end and on the offensive end, but then they also had a bunch of these other guys who, on the right night, these guys could put their fingerprint on a game and their handprint all over it. And that doesn't mean that they're going to do it every single night. Not every night is the Caleb Martin game, and not every night is the Max Strus game, and not every night is the Duncan Robinson game, but they had enough of these guys where one night, 1 out of every 7 games in a 7-game series is a Max Strus game, 1 out of every 7 games is a Caleb Martin game, and 1 out of every 7 of these games is a Duncan Robinson game. Over the course of a 7-game series, that's already 3 games right there that you can win just off of those guys going out there and having a great game. And then you add Jimmy Butler into that, and suddenly your odds of winning 4 out of the 7 games that's necessary to win a 7-game series just went super, super high. And it was the same thing last year. If you look at the Lakers, you have LeBron and AD, and then you have every now and then, 1 or 2 out of every 7 games, you have D'Angelo Russell play amazingly well. And then you have Rui Hachimura catching fire, and you have Lonnie Walker throwing a game out there, and suddenly your odds of winning playoff series really, really skyrocket because you have not only the 1 or 2 dependable pieces at the top, like a Luka Doncic and like a Kyrie Irving, but you also have a Tim Hardaway Jr. And you also have a couple of other guys on a Dallas Mavericks team who can bring it on any given night. And they make you very, very dangerous. You have a PJ Washington who can go out there and hit a bunch of threes in addition to being big for you. And you have a bunch of athletic effort guys who can complement Luka and Kyrie. So they change the complexion of the series. Right? You have on the Boston Celtics. That's why the Boston Celtics have such an amazing roster and such high odds of winning the finals, because you have Tatum, who's very dependable at the top, and you have their number 2, Jaylen Brown, whose name is slipping my mind for a minute. They're at the top, but then you also have Drew Holiday who can go off in any given game. You have guys like a Peyton Pritchard who can go off. You have a Derek White who can go off. You have so many guys who, even in addition to the top couple of players, can go off. You have an Al Horford who can step in and suddenly hit 4 threes in a game and swing that game. You You have Kristaps Porzingis, who can hit 5 or 6 threes in one given night and swing the game from a loss to a win. You have so many of these guys who can go out there and do that for you. So when you have these deeper rosters and you have multiple options or even multiple microwave scorers, that raises your odds. Look at the Denver Nuggets. On a given night, they can have a great game from Jokic and Murray. That's pretty consistent. They almost always will have that. And in addition to that, once or twice every 7-game series, Michael Porter Jr. is going to catch fire. And once a series, KCP is going to catch fire. And once a series, Christian Braun is going to put up a great game. And you factor in all of these guys, and that's what makes a team really formidable in winning the series. You take a team like the Phoenix Suns, and we know what they did yesterday, and we're going to get into that in just a couple of minutes, but the Phoenix Suns, whether they are in a play-in or whether they make it outright into a playoff series, once the playoffs start, they're dangerous because you have Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal. You have 3 guys right there who can swing any given game. And each of them are going to have 2 or 3 games because they're a lot more dependable. They're each going to have several games a series where they play really well, and that makes it tough. And you have Grayson Allen, who can have 2 or 3 games in a 7-game series where he's really good, and that can swing the balance. So these are the teams that are very, very dangerous in 7-game series. So where everyone else is jumping on the bandwagon now and saying, "Oh, look what Kyrie did," and now they're reacting post facto to the Dallas Mavericks beating the Denver Nuggets in a game, and now they're saying, "Hey, wait a second, Dallas is dangerous." We identified these things on the front end before they happened. We said it here on NBAVE, that Dallas was a dark horse to win it, and they were one of the top 6 teams that we gave a chance to win the entire NBA Finals, the whole thing. We said Dallas was one of those teams, and it's because of what you're seeing out there right now in last night's game, that Luka can be the best player in any given game. Kyrie can be that guy who can lift you above from loss to win, and then you have other spark plugs in addition, like a Tim Hardaway Jr., who on the right night can be that microwave guy. He can do the Norman Powell. He can do the Malik Monk. He can bring that to the table, and that's why they were always very dangerous, even before last night. And of course, now everybody else is jumping on the bandwagon and saying the same thing. But just to go in chronological order of what happened last night, now that we've really gone through the prediction of what the Dallas Mavericks were going to do and how suddenly everybody else is jumping back onto their bandwagon, let's go through the games from last night. You had the Milwaukee Bucks beating the Phoenix Suns 140-129. They only ended up beating them by 11 points. And this is in a game where Giannis didn't even play. And this is a very frustrating game for a Phoenix Suns fan because the Suns gave up 82 points in just the first half, right? So if they gave up 140 points in the game and they gave up 82 in the first half, that means in the second half they only gave up 58 points. So if you would give up 58 points per half, then you would only give up 116 points in the game. So they played well enough in the second half to win the ball game. Because you can win games where you give up 116, but you can't win games where you give up 140. You can't win games where you're giving up 70 points a half, or in this case, it was uneven. They gave up 82 in the first half, and then they caught up in the second half and closed the gap, still losing because it's very difficult to overcome that sort of insurmountable lead, and giving up 82 points and a half is a death sentence for your team. And I tweeted out at halftime that any team that gives up 82 points or any team that gives up 80 points in a given half, you need to fire the coach, and because you got to be able to get your players to respond. And I would even say send the team home at halftime, but don't do that. Because that's what the team wants. When a team comes out and doesn't play defense and gives up 82 points in one half, they're saying we didn't really want to suit up for this game. We didn't really want to play. Let's just take the loss. Let's go home at halftime and let's rest up for our next game where we'll come out and we'll give a better effort. So that's what they wanted. So the better way of punishing the Phoenix Suns is forcing them to go out and play the second half of basketball, force them to go out and have to actually exert the energy and play the minutes, despite the fact that they're showing they don't really want to be out there. So it was a bigger punishment for the Suns to make them play the second half than it would have been to just send them home at halftime and say, mercy rule, let's take the L. So the Suns had to go and exert the energy, and they had to play the entire game and lose it. And really, Frank Vogel can say he's upset with the defense his team played, but you have to be able to get a response from your team. And this is where I still think the Phoenix Suns are dangerous in the playoffs. If they can get past the play-in and they're really in a real playoff series, they are dangerous because of the players they'll throw out there. And where in a regular season, they're not able to get themselves up for it, which they should be able to do. You would think that in this tight playoff seeding race, the Suns would give the respect that's needed to the series, to the game, and say, hey, we really need victories because we don't want to play a play-in game where there is a chance that we might not even actually make it to a real series. And think about just how embarrassing that would be to have a team with Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and then also Yusuf Nurkic and Grayson Allen, and then Royce O'Neal, Eric Gordon on the bench. Think of how embarrassing it would be to not even make it to a real playoff series. It would be so embarrassing. You bring in Bradley Beal, you have a no trade clause for him, you have Devin Booker and you have Kevin Durant. For the team with this kind of premier scoring and these kind of Hall of Famers on the roster, for them to not even be in a real series, that would be uber embarrassing. It would be horrible. And it would be just the owners and the team and the players wouldn't be able to look themselves in the mirror if that happened. So you would think that Frank Vogel should be able to convince them and urge them to play a complete defensive effort from quarter 1 through quarter 4. For every minute of the game, you should be playing tough defense, and okay, you can have a lapse for a play, and then that should be the slap in the face and say, hey, we just gave up a bucket here in transition that we really should have been able to stop. We just ran someone off the three-point line, and he got a wide open dunk. Maybe we should tighten that up, and that's the slap in the face, but it should be on individual plays. It shouldn't be for an entire half. It shouldn't be for an entire 24 minutes of basketball that you didn't play defense. That's not acceptable. So I still believe that the Phoenix Suns are dangerous in a playoff series if they can get there, because then they're going to be playing a more committed brand of basketball. But then you still have other factors weighing against them, which is that over the course of 4 back-to-back playoff series, there's a very high chance that Durant or Beal will get injured. And then once one of them are out, you've basically reduced your chances by at least 50% of going as far as you want to. Once any of those guys go out, because you have a shallow roster, so you're very top-heavy with Durant, Booker, and Beal at the top. Once one of them goes out, you've now just taken your odds and totally slashed it in half of actually winning an NBA title. So the Suns, still very dangerous, but I don't like the position that they're in. They have one of the toughest schedules. They have like a top 3 tough schedule for the last 14 games of the season, and they're sitting here in... What are they in 7th? They're sitting in 8th now. They're in a tie for 6th, 7th, 8th with Dallas and with Sacramento. So they're sitting here and they're right now going to be playing a play-in game, at least 1, maybe 2, depending on what happens in the first one. So it's a very dangerous position. I hate the position that they're in for them. But when you don't play that consistent brand of defense every single night, that's the position that you unfortunately put yourself in. You're now playing with fire. Right, where you don't bring that defensive intensity every night, and this is where a team like Oklahoma City and a team like Minnesota are doing much better in the regular season, because these young athletic teams who have the mindset to bring it every single night on defense and play a certain brand of basketball consistently night after night, that adds up to a lot of wins in the regular season. So even though I don't think the Thunder, who win over 70% of their games on the season, and the Timberwolves, who are just 1 game behind the Thunder, I don't really think that they're going to win the NBA Finals, and we didn't include them in our real odds of winning the Finals when we did that podcast some episodes ago. But on a night-to-night basis, they are committed on the defensive end, and that's what enables them to win so many of these ball games. Whereas you take a team like the Phoenix Suns, and they're not doing that night to night. And it's so important that you do that if you want to win ball games. But does that mean that when the playoffs come around, the Suns aren't super dangerous. No, they are super dangerous because they are going to bring that kind of intensity when the playoffs do roll around. They're just not bringing it now every single night because they have older guys and they don't want to bring it. And the same thing, you look at the Los Angeles Clippers. We talked about it the other night when the Clippers played against I believe it was when they played against Minnesota. There were a couple of plays at the end of the game where Kawhi Leonard could have dove on the floor and got the basketball. And Paul George, the same thing, but he's not going to do that. Kawhi Leonard's not going to do that. James Harden, who didn't play in that game but played last night, he's not going to do that. These guys are not going to risk themselves, and they're not going to go all out, balls to the walls, and play that kind of athletic dive on the floor, scrap for the loose ball. They're not going to play like Josh Hart on the New York Knicks plays. They're not going to bring that sort of intensity every single night because, first of all, they probably can't. Because if Kawhi Leonard would play like that for all 82 games or even 70 of the 82 games of the NBA season, he probably wouldn't be out there in the playoffs. Kevin Durant can't play like that every single night. Bradley Beal, so fragile, can't play like that every single night. If they would, they probably wouldn't even be there for the playoffs. They'd be injured. They'd be on the sidelines for the rest of the year. So that's why you have a team like the Phoenix Suns giving up 82 points and a half. It's not that that's really what they should be doing. It's not that that's their identity but when the playoffs come around, that's not going to be their identity. But on a night-to-night basis, they unfortunately have games like that. And the same goes for the Miami Heat. They don't bring it every single night, unfortunately. But in a playoff series, they're still super dangerous. And you have to learn from what we saw last year that they'll still be super dangerous because their mentality is totally different. Because now you're at a point where there isn't 82 games in the season. There's 16 games that you have to win. And if you have 4 back-to-back 7-game series, right, and each one, right, you have 7, and then you have 4 potential series like that, you have only 28 possible total games that you will have to play in playoff series. So there's only 28 games left. Now you're going to play with maximum effort and defensive intensity every single night because if you get hurt, okay, you get hurt. There's only 28 games left. There's nothing that you're saving yourself for. So the Suns would be a very dangerous team if they do make the playoffs, but it's unacceptable the way they played defense last night, but I understand it, unfortunately, because if they would try to play that intensely every single night, their guys just wouldn't make it. So that's what you have in the first game, where the Bucks beat the Suns 140-129 without even Giannis Antetokounmpo's help, with him not even suiting up for the game. Then the Heat beat the Detroit Pistons. I know that it was a game winner from Bam Adebayo, but I'm not going to focus on it. It doesn't really matter. I know that the Heat should be winning these games by more, but whatever it is, they got the job done. The Heat needed to sweep the Pistons. They needed to win both games back-to-back that they played against them, and they did. Good for the Miami Heat, and that moves them up to a 7, and they're half a game back of the 6, and that's really where they need to get to. They need to get to the 6 seed to not play any play-in games and give themselves a better shot of just starting off in the playoffs and not having to work their way there through play-in. Then we had the game where the Dallas Mavericks beat the Denver Nuggets with the incredible buzzer beater by Kyrie. And I don't know if we discussed it on this podcast. I had it in my notes to talk about Kyrie, where there's been so many games where he has taken this kind of shot. Now, the buzzer beater shot was an enhanced version of the shot that he's been taking, but he's been consistently taking a couple of times a game with his right hand. He's been taking this sort of one-hand push, not hook shot, not quite a floater, but going to his right. He's been taking that push shot from about the foul line where nobody else in the league, from the guard position, nobody else really takes that shot in the entire league. And I wanted to talk about it. I've discussed it with my friends on the side, that he's really the only guy who takes this sort of shot. I discussed it with my dad, but I might have discussed it once on the podcast. I'm not sure. I would have to go back and listen to all the episodes again. But Kyrie now pulls this trick shot out of the bag, but it's really not something that's completely out of bounds for him. Kyrie has taken this type of shot, typically with the right hand, and now he takes it with the left hand at the buzzer for the sensational buzzer beater, one of the shots of the year on the short list behind the Max Strus buzzer beater, but this was right up there. Oh, and I believe that Max Strus buzzer beater wasn't against Boston. It was actually against Dallas. Yes, I apologize for misremembering what I said earlier in the podcast, but it was against Dallas. So ironically, you've had two buzzer beaters happening. It's probably two of the best shots of the year. One the Max Strus buzzer beater against Dallas, and one the Kyrie Irving buzzer beater against Denver, and both games involving the Dallas Mavericks. So you have Kyrie pulling that out of his hat, and we already touched on why we thought this was possible from Dallas, and this would be a great series if we could actually end up seeing the Denver Nuggets against the Dallas Mavericks in the West playoffs. And if Dallas wants to make it to the finals, that's what's going to have to happen. These two teams are going to have to face off against each other, and I really hope they do, and I'm really looking forward to it. Then you have the Magic doing what they do, handling business against the Raptors, the Celtics crushing the Washington Wizards by 26. The Spurs beat the Brooklyn Nets 122-115. Not going to focus on that one, as I'm sure barely anyone watched it. And then the Hawks beat the Clippers. The Clippers are going real cold at the wrong time. Now, Clippers will still be dangerous. Again, like we said with the Phoenix Suns, the Clippers are still dangerous if they're in the playoffs firmly, and it seems like they will be because they're still at a 4 seed, and there's very low chance of them dropping all the way to a 7 or an 8 and having to play in a play-in. The Clippers are going to be there, and they just need their guys healthy, and then they need to turn up the heat at that point. And we'll see if they'll be able to do that. Will they be able to turn up the heat at the right time? So let's take a quick look at the standings because it's really coming down to the wire here between 14 and 16 games left on the season, depending on the team. So you have in the Eastern Conference, you still have Celtics, Bucks, Cavaliers, Knicks in 4, Magic right there in 5, and then you have the Pacers in 6, 2 games back of the Magic, the Heat half a game back in 7, the Sixers have dropped all the way to 8, Bulls in 9, Hawks in 10, and now for the first time on the year, you're really starting to have maybe a chance that the 76ers could drop all the way, not only into the play-in, which they're already firmly in the 8th seed, but can they even drop to the 9 and have to be forced to win 2 straight play-in games just to make it to a playoff series? They've dropped all the way this far, and they're still 4.5 games up on the Chicago Bulls. So the question is, with the Bulls have played, they're 33 and 35. That means they've played 68 games. So they have 14 games left on the season. Can the Bulls go 10 and 4 the remainder of the way? And would the Sixers be able to then only go 3? And they played 67 games, so they'll have 15 games left. Can the 76ers go 3 and 12? I don't know if that's really possible. Will the Sixers only go 3 and 12 for the remainder, and will the Bucks be able to then combine with that and go 10 and 4? I don't know. So the odds are that the Sixers will still be in the 8th seed come playoff time, and they will have to just win one of 2 games to make it into the actual playoffs. So their odds are still decent, I would say, of making it to a real playoff series, even though they're playing without Embiid right now. Hopefully Embiid comes back and he gets 1 win in a 1-game play-in, and then they can make it to a real series. Then in the Western Conference, you have the Thunder, followed by the Nuggets a half game back since the Nuggets lost yesterday. Then you have the Timberwolves at 3, the Clippers at 4, the Pelicans staying close at 5, and then you have 6, 7, 8. You have a 3-way tie, Kings, Mavericks, Suns, Warriors at 9, tied with the Lakers at 10. And let's see what we have on the docket tonight. We have 8 games of basketball. You have the Cavaliers going against the Pacers. Cavaliers have not been playing so well for the past while. This game is in Indiana. Indiana is playing a lot better, and I would take Indiana to win this ball game on their home court. Then you have the Pistons, who are going to get killed by the Celtics in Boston. You have the Miami Heat going against the Sixers. And I can guarantee you the Miami Heat are going to win this ball game. I guarantee it. Because the Heat, they're tone deaf to a lot of things happening in the regular season, and they don't bring it every night. And they're inconsistent, and it's baffling, but hey, the Heat will win tonight. Because as blind as they are to the regular season standings, they know they are the 7 seed, and they know the Sixers are the 8 seed, tied with them at 37 and 30. So the Heat will win tonight because they want to separate themselves from the Sixers and put the nail in the coffin and say, that's it. We are in front of you. So on a night where there's 15 games left on the year for you, the Heat are going to beat the Sixers. I guarantee it. Then you have the Chicago Bulls, who are going to face off against the Portland Trailblazers. So the Bulls should be able to handle that one. The Timberwolves are going to go beat the Utah Jazz. Then you have the game of the night. You have the Knicks against the Warriors. The Knicks are coming off a great victory against the Sacramento Kings. The Warriors are coming off a great victory, welcoming back Steph Curry, beating the Los Angeles Lakers. This is going to be an awesome show tonight. It's not at MSG. It's in the Bay. And I'm really, really excited to watch this one. The Knicks against the Warriors. How is this game going to go? Well, for the Knicks, OG's been playing well since he returned, but it does look like he's still going through some issues with the elbow. So as he tries to get used to playing again and shooting that corner three, he's not as dependable on offense. He's very dependable on defense, and he's dependable with rebounding, but he hasn't yet gained back his complete dependability on offense. So, with Jalen Brunson, he's going to play well. We know that. You'll probably get a good game from Bogdanovich. Hartenstein will play well, but I don't know if you have that complete dependability right now from OG on offense, and I think they'll need that to beat the Warriors, because the Warriors are playing very well over the last 20 games or so. So tonight, with Steph Curry back, with Klay Thompson playing well, with Kuminga playing well, with the Warriors having their more of their full team there, I do think the Warriors will get the victory, and I do think the Warriors need the victory more. I think the Warriors are going to win this game, but it should be a close one. I would pick the Warriors at home. Then you have the Grizzlies against the Kings. Kings should be able to handle this one, and they should be able to move out of that tie with the Mavericks and the Suns, and they should be the outright 6 seed. So that is a lot to play for the Sacramento Kings. And then the Lakers will play against the Hawks. If the Lakers are playing without Anthony Davis, which it seems that they will be, then this becomes a much closer game. The Hawks are a live dog, but hey, the Lakers should be able to win this one as well. I would still give them the winning odds at home. Hopefully a big D'Angelo Russell game along with LeBron James, and that would be their recipe to winning it. So, about 15 games to go. It's really heating up as we head towards the playoffs. As always, we are NBAVE. Follow us on social at NBAVE. That's short for NBA Avenue, and you can email the show at nbavenue@yahoo.com. As always, we are your source for a great time every time, and until next time, we are out.